Hey, this is Dave DeCamp from antiwar.com. This is anti-war news for Wednesday, January 22nd, 2025. All right, so we have a whole bunch of stuff to go over today. The first story at the top of antiwar.com. Marco Rubio says the Ukraine war needs to end. So I never thought I'd be writing a story about Marco Rubio calling for an end to a war. But here we are. So Secretary of State Marco Rubio, which I really don't like the sound of that, he was sworn in on Tuesday and said that the war in Ukraine needs to end and that the new Trump administration would work to bring it to a close, although it's still unclear how that will happen. So on the campaign trail, President Trump vowed to bring the war to an end within 24 hours, but fighting continues to rage along the front lines in Ukraine, and Russia and Ukraine traded heavy drone attacks overnight, Monday into Tuesday. Ahead of his swearing-in ceremony, Rubio was asked in an interview about Trump's promise and the situation in Ukraine. He said, quote, "The promise the president made, really, if you look at it, is it's going to be the priority. It's going to be the official policy of the United States that the war in Ukraine needs to come to an end. It is a stalemate," end quote. You see here, this is a map from South Front about the daily fighting in Ukraine. Rubio continued, quote, "We are going to engage in making it end in a way that is sustainable, meaning we don't just want the conflict to end and then restart in 2, 3, or 4 years down the road. We want to bring stability," end quote. So Rubio, who has been incredibly hawkish during his time in Congress, was a staunch supporter of the proxy war following the Russian invasion, but his rhetoric began to change in 2024. And in recent months, he has echoed President Trump's calls to bring the war to a close. This is something he said, right before he was actually nominated by President Trump. So I think it's clear that this is Trump's influence that has brought Marco Rubio to this position. And Rubio has previously said that both Ukraine and Russia must make concessions to end the war, but it's unclear what kind of deal the U.S. might offer. Russia clearly, has the upper hand here. They have time on their side. So that means Russia is not going to back down on its core demands. And of course, that includes Ukrainian neutrality and a commitment that Ukraine won't join NATO. But it also includes maintaining control of this territory that it has captured. What Putin has said in his, public peace offerings is that Ukraine must withdraw its forces from the 4 oblasts that Russia said that it annexed. That's his starting point for negotiations. So again, it's just not clear what kind of deal there's going to be. Russia said that they haven't gotten a specific proposal from the new Trump administration, but Putin's saying he's ready to talk to Trump. Trump says he's ready to talk to Putin. So I'm hoping that, I think the best case here is that they just agree, they get Ukraine to agree to a ceasefire and then start working on a potential deal. But as of now, this war continues. People are still dying. And, there's a chance it could still drag out for a long period of time, but let's hope that it comes to an end quickly. I mean, just the fact that you have Marco Rubio, even Marco Rubio is saying that this war needs to end. So I think it's a good sign that it will come to an end, and hopefully that is soon. All right, so the next one here, Trump places Cuba back on the state sponsor of terrorism list. So this was expected. President Trump has relisted Cuba as a state sponsor of terrorism in one of the first foreign policy moves of his new administration. The move was included in an executive order Trump signed on Monday that rescinded 78 of President Biden's executive actions. Biden only removed Cuba from the list last week. And it was essentially guaranteed that Trump would reverse this designation, especially because he had Marco Rubio coming in as a Secretary of State, and Rubio is very hawkish on Cuba. He's even introduced legislation in Congress that would prohibit the president from removing Cuba from this list. And, it's unclear now what's going to happen. There was kind of a deal. It was kind of unclear exactly how it worked. The U.S. officials in the Biden administration said that they decided to lift the designation as part of a deal brokered by the Vatican, brokered by the Catholic Church, to release Cuban political prisoners. And Cuba's president said, it was the same day that the news came out that Biden was lifting the designation. He said he was releasing 553 prisoners. He said he was doing it in the spirit of the Jubilee year that the Vatican is celebrating in 2025. He did not link it directly to the terror designation. And I know some prisoners have been released already, so not really clear what's going to happen there. But in response to Trump relisting Cuba, the Cuban foreign minister called the designation a tool of political coercion. Iran, North Korea, and Syria are the only other 3 countries that are on this list, and it essentially just means that these harsh sanctions on Cuba will remain on top of the decades-old trade embargo, of course. And I mean, the justification, to say what terrorism is Cuba sponsoring, it just doesn't make any sense. It's just this holdover of the Cold War. And Cuba was first put on this list under the Reagan administration in 1982. The Obama administration removed Cuba in 2015, so it's been a back and forth now. Obama removed it in 2015. Mike Pompeo put it back on in 2021. Biden lifts it, and then Trump immediately puts it back on. So not a good sign for any kind of normalization with Cuba. Obama took a decent amount of steps toward normalization, but he did not fully lift the embargo. And that made it easy for Trump to reverse everything. All right, so the next one here, Marco Rubio holds talks with Quad leaders on the first day. So this article's from the South China Morning Post. So Rubio, we always talk about how hawkish he is. One thing he's particularly hawkish on is China. And he sent a signal on Tuesday. His first meeting with foreign officials as Secretary of State was with the foreign ministers of Australia, Japan, and India. And this is what they call the Quad, the Quadrilateral Security Dialogue. And essentially what this is like an informal grouping but they've done military drills together. Basically, the U.S. hopes that the Quad is a foundation for some kind of NATO-style alliance in Asia that's aimed at China. They kind of put out a boilerplate statement saying that they stated their strong opposition to any unilateral actions that seek to change the status quo by force or coercion, clearly aimed at China. But again, this is kind of more about the symbol of Marco Rubio coming in. First day, what does he do? He goes and meets with these Quad officials. And this is something, the China hawks, the real China hawks who want to get ready for war over Taiwan, which is, a lot of them, but the ones who really want to focus on it. Their view is that the U.S. should wind down support for Ukraine so they could focus more on Asia. And that's unfortunately a part of Marco Rubio's thinking, I'm sure, when it comes to playing ball with what Trump wants to do on Ukraine, probably in hopes that they could really ramp things up over in the Asia Pacific. All right, so the next one here, Israel launches a major offensive in the West Bank. The Israeli military launched a major offensive in the Israeli-occupied West Bank on Tuesday, focused on the northern city of Jenin, which came just days after the ceasefire in Gaza took effect. The Palestinian Ministry of Health said at least 9 Palestinians had been killed and 40 had been wounded by the Israeli attack on Jenin. Several doctors and nurses were among the wounded, according to the director of the Jenin government hospital. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu announced that Israel had begun an extensive and significant military operation in Jenin. The Palestinian news agency Wafa reported that Israeli warplanes and drones launched airstrikes on Jenin, and Israeli forces invaded the city with many armored vehicles, and Israeli snipers were also deployed for the assault. So a big attack here. You see a picture of one person that was killed in this raid. The Quds Brigade, which is the armed wing of the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, they said that their fighters based in Jenin were confronting the invading Israeli forces and fired a heavy volley of bullets, but so far there's been no word of Israeli casualties. So PIJ, which is the Islamic Jihad, said that the purpose of the new offensive was for Netanyahu to save his faltering government coalition, which I think they're probably right about that. And Islamic Jihad is calling for Palestinians in the West Bank to resist. Israeli Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich, who threatened that his religious Zionism party would quit the government if the genocidal war in Gaza does not resume, he said the West Bank offensive was part of a deal that he made with Netanyahu. He said, quote, "This is part of the war goals that were added to the cabinet's demands for religious Zionism on Friday," end quote. So he's saying that this is because of us. We put the pressure, this is part of the deal. Okay, you signed the ceasefire deal in Gaza, we get the escalation in the West Bank. That's what Smotrich is saying, at least. And Smotrich is a West Bank settler himself. He's long called for the annexation of the territory. He said the operation was launched to protect illegal settlements. He said, quote, "Iron Wall," which is what they're calling the operation, "will be a strong and ongoing campaign against the elements of terrorism and its perpetrators to protect the settlement and the settlers and for the security of the entire state of Israel, of which the settlement is the security belt," end quote. The Trump administration is expected to be more supportive of the Israeli government's plans to expand settlements in the West Bank, which was demonstrated by another move that President Trump made, reversing Biden orders, was lifting sanctions on West Bank settlers. And the offensive in the West Bank, this, I think, is probably part of the deal that was reached between Witkoff, Trump's envoy, and Netanyahu to get Netanyahu to sign on the Gaza ceasefire deal was, we'll back you in the West Bank. If you want to, do what you want to do there, we'll give you more military aid. And so this is something I think that could get pretty, pretty bad, escalate even more in the next few days. All right, so the next one here, Palestinians dig 68 bodies out of the Gaza rubble. So on Tuesday, Palestinians in Gaza continued digging bodies out of the rubble of buildings destroyed by Israel as the ceasefire between Israel and Hamas entered its third day. Gaza's health ministry said that hospitals received a total of 72 bodies over the previous 24-hour period, including 68 that were dug out of the rubble and one person who died of previously sustained injuries. So the other three people, I assume, were the three who were killed by Israeli snipers on Monday. Al Jazeera reported that 3 Palestinians, including a small child, were killed by Israeli snipers on Monday despite the ceasefire, and I went over that yesterday. And on Tuesday, the Palestinian news agency Wafa reported that another Palestinian was killed by Israeli gunfire near the southern city of Rafah. So the health ministry said that the bodies had brought its death toll since October 7th, 2023 to 47,107. So the civil defense has estimated that 10,000 bodies could be under the rubble, could be even more, and at least 2,840 were melted, leaving no trace behind. So the health ministry's number is based on bodies brought to the hospitals and morgues, so it's going to continue to rise as they're digging through the rubble. And this is something that's going to take a very long time. And going back to that Lancet study, that study found the health ministry's numbers are likely an undercount by 41%, and that the real death toll is likely over 70,000. And that's just including violent deaths. All right, so the next one here, Trump says that he's not confident the Gaza ceasefire will hold. So I mentioned this yesterday, but I thought it was worth writing up a story about. Just not a good sign here. On Monday night, President Trump said he was not confident that the Gaza ceasefire deal between Israel and Hamas would hold through all 3 phases. When asked by a reporter if he thinks the deal will last, Trump said, quote, "I'm not confident. It's not our war. It's their war. I am not confident. But I think they're very weakened on the other side," end quote. So while Trump said the conflict is not our war, the Israeli military is entirely reliant on U.S. military aid to sustain operations in Gaza. According to Israeli officials, the Trump administration had agreed to provide more weapons as part of a deal to reach the ceasefire. So I guess the positive way to read this would be, oh, if he's saying it's not our war, that means we're not going to keep funding it. But unfortunately, I don't think that's the case. Trump also noted the mass destruction in Gaza, saying the enclave was like a massive demolition site. And he added that it was a phenomenal location on the sea. He said, quote, everything's good. It's like some beautiful things could be done with it, end quote. So then I just mentioned some of the things that we've been going over. Netanyahu saying that he got a guarantee from Trump to restart things, but then there's also signs that Witkoff is determined to see that the deal sticks. So hopefully it does not restart. And Smotrich says that he has a guarantee from Netanyahu that they will restart, but we'll see. All right, the next one here, Israel's top general to step down for failure to prevent October 7th attack. This article is from Kyle Anzalone at the Libertarian Institute. So the Israeli Defense Forces Chief of Staff announced he would step down in the coming months over a failure to prevent the October 7th Hamas attack on southern Israel. Since the Hamas assault, he has led the IDF as it waged a genocidal war in Gaza. In a letter addressed to Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Defense Minister Israel Katz, IDF Chief of Staff Lieutenant General Herzi Halevi said that he will resign in March. He said, quote, as a result of my responsibility for the IDF's failure on October 7th, and at a time when the military has recorded exceptional achievements in restoring Israel's deterrence and strength, I wish to conclude my tenure on March 6, 2025. On the morning of October 7th, under my command, the IDF failed in its mission to protect the citizens of Israel, end quote. And so there's a lot, when we're talking about the failure to prevent October 7th, the failure to defend the Israeli people that live in southern Israel, there's all these signs that they had plenty of warning that these, not just the military, but the government, the intelligence agencies had all these warnings that something big was coming. And of course, this falls on Netanyahu, but there's been reports in Israeli media that Netanyahu is working to blame most of the security failures on Halevi, on the military, trying to just pass it off. And even though in the meantime, they're trying to forge transcripts of when, Netanyahu first got the call that something was happening. And this is, I think that Islamic Jihad statement is exactly right. One of the reasons why we see the escalation in the West Bank is that Netanyahu just needs war. He needs constant conflict to stay in power. All right, so the next one here, Syria, 6 killed as HTS raids Western Shia village. So this article is from Jason Ditz. Clashes were reported in the western part of Syria's Homs governorate as troops loyal to the new Islamist Hayat Tahrir al-Sham government attacked the Shiite majority village of Gawar al-Gharbiya. At least 6 people were killed. The troops were backed by multiple tanks, and in addition to the government's own forces, paramilitaries loyal to HTS also participated. The government claimed through state-run Sana news agency that the offensive was meant to target remnants of an unnamed Alawite militia loyal to the former Assad government. Details are still emerging, but reports are that only 2 of the slain were armed individuals, conceivably members of the alleged militia. The other 4 were civilians captured and summarily executed by the fighters backing the HTS raid. So more of this sectarian violence, executions from this HTS government. Though HTS promised inclusivity in their new government, they are also closely linked in historically and ideologically with al-Qaeda, so their general hostility towards Shiites in general and the Alawites come as no surprise. Since the regime change, HTS has set up checkpoints in Alawite neighborhoods in much of the country and conducted multiple arrest raids, rounding people up nominally linked to the previous government. Former Assad's family was Alawite, though Alawites only make up about 10% of Syria's population. The raids have resulted in multiple disappearances in those neighborhoods. All right, so the next one here, Israel advances into southern Lebanon city, continues to destroy homes. Another one from Jason. So there are about 5 days left in the 60-day ceasefire between Israel and Lebanon, and the Israeli withdrawal by that deadline shows no signs of that happening. And there's reports that Israeli troops have moved from the town of Marun al-Ras into the suburbs of the city of Bit Jabal. And as they moved in, they began attacking houses in the residential area of those suburbs. There's been machine gun fire. There's also demolitions in other nearby towns. So again, just no sign that they're going to be withdrawing in 5 days. I haven't seen any statements from the new U.S. administration about this. We saw Hochstein. Hochstein was, his official position was an advisor to Biden, so he's gone. So I haven't seen any comments from the new administration about the situation in Lebanon, but there's a chance it could really restart in Lebanon as well. All right, so the next one here, so more Trump stuff. So Trump pauses foreign development assistance. So this is one of the executive orders. Sorry, the computer's running a little slow here. One of the executive orders that Trump signed on Monday was an order for a 90-day pause on U.S. foreign development assistance. And it's unclear how extensive this order is, or if it will have any impact on military aid to foreign countries. That you see like the title of the executive order says foreign aid, but then if you look at the actual order, it's foreign development assistance, which I don't think that really applies to the certain types of military aid that the U.S. provides foreign countries. And Ukrainian officials have said it does not apply to weapons flowing to Ukraine or economic aid that's been approved by President Biden, and the order is not expected to apply to weapon shipments to Israel or other countries that have kind of long-term agreements that with the U.S. for military aid, like Egypt and Jordan, some of these heavy hitters that get a lot from the U.S. each year. So according to the Associated Press, it is not immediately clear how much assistance would initially be affected by the Monday order, as funding for many programs has already been appropriated by Congress and is obligated to be spent, if not already spent. The purpose of the order is to review each program's efficiency and consistency with United States foreign policy. One problem with this is that this is going to be overseen by Secretary of State Marco Rubio. I still really don't like saying that, but I really didn't like Blinken. So, I guess, Blinken was probably the worst Secretary of State of my time, I would say. But anyway, so Rubio is going to be overseeing this. So that doesn't give me much confidence, but, we'll see if we see some cuts here to foreign aid. This is one of those things. You see the headline, Trump pauses foreign aid for 90 days, and it sounds great. But then, you kind of read the details, and, I don't think it's really going to apply to the military aid at all. All right, so the next one here, Trump signs order delaying TikTok ban. This is another one from Kyle. So one of Donald Trump's first acts as president was to order his attorney general to withhold enforcement of the ban on TikTok for over 2 months. Trump has said that he wants an agreement with 50% American ownership of the popular video sharing app. The executive order instructs Trump's pick for Attorney General Pam Bondi to not take any action on behalf of the United States to enforce this law that would ban TikTok for 75 days. And basically, it sounds like, again, that he's trying to get an American company to buy TikTok. He wants at least 50% U.S. ownership of TikTok. There were some reports that Elon Musk was thinking about buying it, but I think TikTok said that wasn't true at all. Trump was asked about it, and he said, that could be a solution, Musk buying it. But I don't know. It's going to stick around at least for a few months while they try to find a buyer for it. And TikTok's playing ball with Trump, so it does seem like they might be on board for whatever kind of deal he has in mind. And I saw Rand Paul, he's making I forget, he was on Fox News. I forget who the host was. So Senator Rand Paul has really been good on this lately. He put out this video saying he just, signed up for TikTok to protest the ban, saying all really good things about it. And he was on some Fox News show explaining to the host who really owns TikTok. So I forget exactly the details, but basically TikTok is owned by ByteDance, which is a Chinese company. But the accusation that you always hear is that it's owned by the Chinese government, but ByteDance is not owned by the Chinese government. 60% is is investors, including a lot of foreign investors. About 20% of the ownership are the Chinese software developers. And then the other 20% are American employees who have shares, or maybe they have 10%, but it's broken down. It's just not this talking point. And the data's in the U.S., so it's just the whole narrative is just phony. And but it doesn't matter. Again, this whole Supreme Court ruling and everything is just a very bad precedent going forward, even though it looks like TikTok will remain. Just the whole thing is not good. All right, so the next one here. Trump orders 50 former Intel officials stripped of security clearance. This is another one from Kyle. So this is from the Libertarian Institute again. So Trump signed an executive order that strips 50 former U.S. intelligence officials of their security clearance. Trump said the former officials had interfered in the 2020 election by coordinating with the Joe Biden campaign to discredit an important story involving Hunter Biden scandals. So these were the officials. If you remember back in October 2020, when this New York Post story came out about Hunter Biden's laptop, 51 former U.S. intelligence officials said, "Oh, it's Russian. It's Russian disinformation," even though there was just absolutely no evidence Russia was involved in this thing at all. So that's who Trump is stripping them of their security clearance, and he's also stripped some people of their Secret Service protection, including John Bolton. So kind of one of the funnier orders that Trump has signed, one of the many orders that he signed. All right, so the last story here, Trump pardons Silk Road founder Ross Ulbricht. So for those not familiar with Ross Ulbricht, this isn't really a foreign policy story, but it's very good for freedom here in the United States. He was a founder of the Silk Road, which was an anonymous online marketplace that you could purchase things with crypto. And this was back in the day, back in 2011, when Bitcoin was, still pretty young. And he was convicted and sentenced to life in prison, 2 life sentences for running the website because people sold drugs on it. But he didn't sell drugs himself. He just ran the website. So it set a very bad precedent. So this is a very good pardon to happen. And this is something libertarians have been working for a very long time. And credit to the Libertarian Party. They got Trump to speak at the convention. And while he was there, he said, if you vote for me, I will pardon Ross. And also credit to Thomas Massie, Republican congressman from Kentucky. He said it was a condition of his endorsement of Trump to pardon Ross. And also, of course, credit to all the activists who have made this a cause for so long. So this is a pretty big deal, especially if you're a libertarian. This is a very big deal, and it's good to see. And I want to read Trump's Truth Social post. He said, quote, "I just called the mother of Ross William Ulbricht to let her know that in honor of her and the libertarian movement, which supported me so strongly, it was my pleasure to just have signed a full and unconditional pardon of her son, Ross. The scum that worked to convict him were some of the same lunatics who were involved in the modern-day weaponization of government against me. He was given 2 life sentences plus 40 years. Ridiculous," end quote. And it's a full pardon, unconditional. I assumed he was going to commute his sentence. I believe when he gave the speech at the LP convention, he said he was going to grant him clemency. So full pardon, which is good to see. So that is it for the news for today. Please go check out our viewpoints. One from Joseph Terwilliger, how the U.S. uses and abuses Latin America. One from Norman Solomon, how U.S. media hides truths about the Gaza war. One from David S. D'Amato, unheeded warnings, Sagan, Eisenhower, and the ultimate gamble. One from Ramsey Baroud, the Gaza genocide, the fall of Israel's immunity. And one from Branko Marchteach, on foreign policy, Biden leaves a global trail of destruction. Sorry, I'm struggling to talk here at the end. So go check that out. Check out our blog. We have an interview from Kelly Vlahos, interviewed Scott Horton about his new book, Provoked, which you should all get a copy of if you haven't already. Also, Kyle Anzalone's show is in there, Conflicts of Interest, and a few other things. So always lots of content to read, even if you watch or listen to this show. So you could always support us by liking, sharing, subscribing. All that stuff helps out. Follow us on social media, Instagram, on X, on TikTok. I will be back tomorrow with some more news. Thanks for listening.